This is our first foray into releasing a podcast, and we're happy you're here with us in our early beta tests. As such, things may be a little rough at first as we iron out audio, video, and studio setup issues. Hang in there while we get our bearings, so we can bring you much higher quality future episodes. Welcome to the GeekBits podcast with your hosts, Mike, David, and Craig. Okay, well, welcome to episode 2. Yeah, we'll wave over there to the people that are watching on video. Welcome to episode 2 of the still as yet unnamed podcast. And hopefully maybe by the time this actually gets posted, it'll have a name. And also for those of you who are watching, yes, it's very laid, just kind of parts of pieces laying around the room to keep we're just trying to have some sound deadening in the room. So we laid some ceiling tiles and some carpet tiles and stuff around, and it works. Not very pretty, but eventually we'll have a real studio we can shoot this in. It'll still be this room. We'll just do it right. So today's episode is going to be about what it was like growing up in the late 70s and early 80s as a child that was very computer literate, unlike most of the population, and what it was like growing up, like being, like, for example, smarter than your teacher when it came to computers and electronics and things like that. Like most of us have the old joke of where we talked about, hey, we had to program the VCR for our parents because they didn't know how, but, this is like the next phase of that for the nerds. And this is when being a nerd or a geek was actually not cool in any way, and you're actually made fun of. And so that's what today's podcast is all about. And I think, David, you wanted to kind of maybe lead off with a thought.
Yeah, so, when I think back of my time in elementary school, I did not know a single other student in school that had a computer besides me. And when I got to junior high, we're talking 7th, 8th grade, I think I knew like 4 people in the entire school that had computers. And we all knew who each other were, right? I mean, yeah. I don't know how we found each other, but somehow just through general conversation, we figured it out. And then even by high school, I think that there probably, I don't know how many was in my graduating class, several hundred. I think there probably weren't more than like maybe 30 people in high school that had computers at home. And even the people that had them at this point didn't necessarily know a lot about them because by this point we were talking about early, like, PC clones like Compacts, ASTs, stuff like that. So they weren't necessarily experts in them, and it weren't necessarily even a hobby. It was just like their family had a computer. So yeah, through that time, I saw, pretty much going from like the only person that had a computer to a few people and then maybe a few more. But I was kind of curious what your experience would be with that.
Yeah, pretty similar. Like you guys were the first ones I think I knew that had computers in their home. So you guys had the VIC-20 and the little cassette drive and all that. And I had used computers in school, the venerated Commodore PET. But that was really it. And I don't, the Atari 2600 was floating around, so people had some, primitive early game consoles, but that's, nobody had computers, nobody knew anything about them at that time. And it wasn't, probably not until middle school, early high school, I started knowing a few other people that actually had computers or did anything with them.
So I think... like, from my perspective of all of our really close-knit friends, I think you were my only friend that had a computer, period.
For a long time, I think that was the case. You guys were it.
None of our other really close friends had a computer, so we had obviously had different interests, right?
Right.
But yeah, it was mostly you and I. I think you shared kind of a similar experience, David.
Yeah. When we lived there in Mansfield, there was one other kid down the street, and I can't remember his name. He had an Atari 800.
An Atari 800, yeah.
And I don't think I went in there and saw it more than once.
So there was a kid named Steven that lived down the street from us. Do you remember him? Did you know? He was a little bit of a bully. But he had a TI 99 4A.
Oh, okay. I remember him.
So did you just happen to trigger my memory that he was another person that
Well,
had
that's
a
what was
computer.
wrong with him because he had that.
He had a
yeah,
TI 99. He was obviously pure evil. Like nobody.
Yeah, sorry.
Apologies to all the TI fans out there, but you're the devil. So.
There was actually one kid in junior high that had an Apple II that didn't like me. He was actually kind of a bully of mine, and he would often taunt me about my Commodore 64, how inferior it was to his Apple. And so he wasn't exactly a friend, but
somebody you knew.
Yeah. So anyway, so we were going to talk about a number of stories related to that. I don't know who wants to kick off with with the first story on that. I'll start with a small story and just say that in my junior high, Craig mentioned the Commodore PET in elementary school, and we did have PETs at my elementary school as well. But I don't.
The PET was the first computer I think I ever touched, and it was because of the one
same here
in elementary school. Yeah.
But we did not go into the computer lab more than about once a year. I mean, I think I like, third grade, fourth grade, fifth grade, I think once a year I would go into the computer lab. Like, it was not something we did often. And I think we went in there and we played like Hangman with our vocabulary words or something like that. And I was the only one in there that even, I think at the time, again, I was in elementary school. I think I had this perception that maybe everybody knew about computers, but I kind of started to realize that, hey, I was the only one here that knew how, like, to operate this. Of course, the teacher didn't want us pushing run stop, because if you push run stop, it would break the basic program and you could list it. And nobody else even thought to do that, but I did. And they're like, "Don't do that here," and they'd start that up again or whatever. And they thought I'd hit it by accident.
I had a very different experience with that early elementary experience with the Commodore PET because, well, first they were going to take us in to do math, which I didn't realize. We're gonna do computer lab, and I was like, cool. And I was picturing kind of like War Games, a panel of LEDs, and we would push the LEDs or something like that. That's, as a kid, what I thought a computer was. And I was a little disappointed when I saw these little green screen things and we were doing math problems. But I guess my mom enrolled me in an after-school computer class on the Commodore PET, and we were doing BASIC. We were doing Commodore BASIC. Hit run stop, try the different keys, try the different commands, load stuff off a disk. So I fell in love with programming in like 4th or 5th grade, I think.
I just learned something about Craig that I didn't know after these many, many decades. Fantastic.
So I was very fortunate that it was a school that they were just pretty progressive, like to give you that exposure.
Yeah. Was that what school was that? Do you remember?
That was Jailborn Elementary.
Jailborn in Mansfield.
I think got bulldozed, and I think they rebuilt it in a different location or different, a different building. I don't know.
David and I went to a little school called Tarver-Rendon, which was kind of way out towards Burleson, and but the computer lab, I think it was like. It seems to me like it was part of the library or something. I'm trying to remember exactly. So it was just like shoved off in a corner.
I remember a circular table with multiple PETs around the table, and then one like disk drive that they were all connected to.
Yeah. Maybe it was U-shaped, like off the wall, something like that. But yeah, it was definitely like potted out somehow. Yeah. And it had like a shared disk drive and a shared printer, which was I think pretty common for PETs back then. So. Should we, like, part of what I want to kind of get to today is what it was like, and I'm kind of choosing my words carefully, but I guess I'm not going to because I don't want to sound arrogant, right? But there's this whole, we in many cases knew more than the teachers actually knew because we were nerdy little kids and we were reading all the manuals and everything. It was something we were really interested in. And so that actually wound up causing me some grief several times. Sometimes for no fault of my own, and sometimes very self-inflicted. Part of the grief was I would always go ahead of whatever the lesson plan for that day was in computer class, I was usually done with it in 5 minutes. And I made straight A's the entire year, all the way through in that class. And I didn't have to work near as hard as the other kids. Because I'd already kind of done the work at home, kind of stuff, right? Yeah. And I'm just kind of want to talk about some of those experiences because that was very much not the norm, right? Yeah. Very much not the norm. So it'd almost be like a kid coming in, like who had a dad as a veterinarian and taking veterinarian class or something, and already knowing how to operate, and the teacher is trying to teach you the basics,
Yeah.
So.
Well, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to start off with one. I've got like 3 stories I want to tell. But
yeah, go ahead, tell one.
Yeah.
That I'm sure that'll spark tons of conversation.
We did take in junior high. We had an Apple II lab where we learned. It was for learning basic, and it was a whole semester. It was called computer. What do they call that? Computer literacy. That's what they
computer
called
literacy.
it.
Yes, yes.
And I'd never really used an Apple up to that point, having grown up with Commodores. And actually, I wasn't very impressed with the Apples at the time, actually, because they had a lot of old Apple IIs with green screen monitors in there, and
beeper speakers.
If it makes you feel better, Apple probably isn't a company that's really around anymore. They probably died years ago. I haven't really heard much about them.
Me either.
But anyway, so the thing is, I wasn't terribly impressed with those computers, but I also didn't realize at the time that those computers, that's an architecture that came out in the 70s, where my Commodore was a product of the 80s, and so I didn't really, look at it from a fair, objective standpoint on that, because I just didn't have the knowledge at the time. But anyway, BASIC was fairly similar to Commodore BASIC, although I found the interface irritating because you couldn't, cursor up and edit lines and stuff like that like you could. But like you said, I totally aced that class. I didn't even need to read the book. The book was in fact, the book that we had, my knowledge was an order of magnitude higher than what was in our actual,
in the curriculum.
The curriculum, yeah. And so there was literally nothing for me to learn there. And I'm glad that the computer literacy teacher we had at the time, and I don't remember his name, but he recognized that in me right away, because I would often use functions and things that hadn't been taught yet. I didn't do it on purpose. It was just because I
know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah, you're like, they want you to use a certain set of commands for this specific piece of the class, and you already are way ahead of that, and it's hard not to use those.
Yeah, and so he would look at my program at the end of the day, and he's like, "Well, where did you learn this?" And I'd be like, "Oh, I have a computer at home. I've been programming for years." So he actually encouraged me, and he gave me additional work challenges and stuff to do. And I would, like Mike said, I would finish my work in like 5 minutes, and then I would just play around with Apple II Basic. I finally figured out how to get into high-res graphics mode, and I started writing little programs to do like kaleidoscopes and stuff like that. And everybody in the class was amazed when they saw it.
It's funny you mentioned that, because I had the same class, computer literacy, on the Apple II, and one of our projects, like the big project for our grade, was to draw something on the screen, right? Just draw an image using low-res graphics.
Right. That we had the same.
Yeah, and so I drew a dragon, but then I was like, I can animate this. And so, because everything was just dots and lines, like you'd plop a pixel, or you could say, start here, end here. I'm gesturing in the air as if people on a podcast can see me, but point on the left, point on the right, and it would the program would draw a line between. There'd be a function to do that. Well, I figured out you could make the lines disappear by drawing black over them, and then put other colored lines. So I made the dragon breathe flame, and the whole class was like, whoa, so it was just a tiny bit of animation. It was just like, it's that same sort of thing. You loved tinkering with it. You had a computer at home. Yeah. And so you figured out shit that other people didn't.
It's really interesting, because I had a very, very different experience from that. My computer literacy teacher was a woman, so it was obviously not the same person that you guys had. But she was very, very frustrated with the fact that I already knew that stuff, and I think she begrudgingly let me kind of do my own things, but I really think she wished that I would just follow the lesson plan exactly as it was written, and don't veer too far away from it. And that was my experience. Was she was kind of holding me back purposefully because I was an irritant to her.
I only had one experience like that. My teacher in middle school, where I did that project, she was cool with everything. She was encouraging and everything. But I used to sneak in 6th grade, which was before I had that class. I would sneak in early in the morning to the computer lab, and there would usually be nobody there, and I would start tinkering with them. And then a class started coming in, and I was just in the corner doing my own thing while she's doing an early morning class. And I don't remember, maybe I was just playing games or I was programming in BASIC. But eventually she looked over at me and she's like, "Are you in this class?" I'm like, "No, I just like computers." And she's like, "Get out." That was my only discouraging
funny.
thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was like, darn it. And I never got to go back in there and tinker with the Apple IIs again until middle school.
Wow, I didn't know that. Wow, cool.
So, yeah, so my junior high computer literacy teacher, like I said, he was very good. He recognized that I had knowledge and he encouraged it and so forth. Things changed a bit when I got to high school, though. First of all, I wanted to take some computer classes in high school, but the high school counselor would not allow me to sign up to computer classes because they said I'm required to take typing classes first. And I told them, says, well, I can already type. I can prove it to you. And they wouldn't allow me. No, if you didn't learn it from us, you probably don't know how to do it right. And you have to know how to type in order to take computer language classes.
Not true. I have programmers that work for me to this day that are hunting peckers. Like they somehow get around. Like they don't type the right way.
Anyway, it was just an excuse because that's what the rules were, and they were just trying to figure out a way to justify them. But because they couldn't imagine that any student would possibly come in knowing how to type. Well, there's a funny story about that. So I didn't get to take any computer classes, but in high school we did have computer lab. It was a writing lab. They had a bunch of Macintoshes set up. There were Mac Pluses and Mac SEs, and we used Apple Write, I think is what it was called.
Mm-hmm.
And they're just like, we had to do our like book reports and stuff on regular pen and paper, and then we would bring them in and type them out, which seemed so redundant,
right?
But I remember the very first day that we went in there. Of course, the teacher had the projector, and she wanted to show us all how to use the Macs, and it was pretty obvious how all that stuff worked, but she was extremely angry if anybody veered off the course, and she did not want anybody going. We were forbidden to go into the control panel and all this kind of stuff. Back then, I guess they didn't have any way to actually lock that kind of stuff out.
Yeah.
And so anyway, I had to sit through this boring, it was almost pretty much the whole class, and then we came back the next day where we were actually going to start really working. So I start typing out my document, and I'm just, after a minute, I sort of noticed I had like a little crowd formed around me, and I was so focused on typing out my book report that
totally sounds like you as a kid, just in the zone,
yeah.
and oblivious.
Still today. And at some point, I stopped typing, and I looked around, and there's like 6 kids standing behind me, and I'm like, what's the problem? And they're like, how did you learn to type that fast? Because they're all sitting around hunting and pecking for every little key. And it didn't even occur to me that other kids didn't know how to type. It's just something I guess I thought everybody knew, And of course, again, the whole irony there is that they wouldn't let me take the computer classes because I didn't know how to type.
Yeah.
Anyway, I have another story about that, but I'll let somebody else go next.
Well, I'll tell a story from my childhood that's around the same time, I think, as that. And this is one of those situations where I got myself in trouble. And it was really pretty much because of boredom. Like I'm telling you, I'm not kidding when I say that I would finish my work for the computer class in like 5 minutes and then have nothing else to do. And so I was always just sitting there, and all we had in computer lab in high school was they were DOS PCs, right? This is beyond the Apple II, and we were into the DOS stage. And so there wasn't much to do. You had a DOS disk in front of you, and you could write batch files, and that's not much else, right?
Yeah.
And so I was always bored in that class and just wanted it to be over, which is ridiculous because I loved computers and couldn't wait to get away from them because of that class. And so I sat there one day and I was watching the teacher. I was sitting at my little desk, and the teacher's desk was where I could kind of see what she was doing. And I was watching her, and she was typing this. She had this thing. It was I think it was called make lesson plan or something like that. It was a batch file. And so let me kind of tell you how this works. So every day you'd get to class, and the computer, the PC, had a A drive and a B drive. And the lesson plan went in A drive, and your work disk went into B drive. And you always use the same work disk. It contained your work for the entire semester. Like everything that you did, you saved on that disk. And at the end of the day, she had this packet of it was like a flip binder with a bunch of plastic sleeves in it where you put your disk in before you left the day. You never took your disk home with you. And so, but every day she had to make, it was the same set of disks, and she had to copy the lesson plan on all, I think there were 30 computers in the class or something like that. So she had to copy 30 copies of the lesson plan for that day. And so I was sitting there, again, bored to tears, didn't have anything else to do. And I'm just kind of watching her, and I'm like, oh, she makes the lesson plan every day. I didn't realize. I just sort of thought that she had just like big boxes of discs, and every day was a different disc. But she actually makes the lesson plan every day. And so I was watching her, figured out how she did it. And so, like, the next day or a few days later, something like that, like, I would always, I'll tell you guys, if mom's listening to this, I'm sorry, Mom, I was not a delinquent, but I used to skip band all the time because we had this, it was the first period class, and we had this teacher, his name was John Parnell, I think his name was, and he never, like, he refused to do roll, like he would never call roll, so they never knew if you were in band or not. Like, the only way you would know is if, like, they needed you for something specific and you weren't there. And so, but anyway, I skipped band all the time because of that, and it just so happens that my computer class was second period. And then there was no first period computer class. So I snuck in, instead of going to band, I snuck into that teacher's room, and I got that disc, and I edited that batch file. And what it did is it generated a new auto exec bat, and then it copied like the lesson plan over, and then when you booted off that disk, it would just boot that lesson.
So every kid had a copy of that disk.
Yes.
And it would boot up the lesson plan for them and tell them what to do.
Right.
What could go wrong if you get a hold of that?
Yeah. So anyway, I edited the file right there at the teacher's desk. Like, I don't know how I got away with this, but she was nowhere to be found. And so what I did was each lesson, there was like 4 lessons that you had to go through every day. And like the batch file, as soon as you exited the first lesson, it would just load the second lesson off the disk. And so what I did is at the end of the third lesson, because I wanted it to be like quite a ways through class and not at the very beginning, I edited the batch file so that it would basically drew a little smiley face, like out of like characters, like it's just like a box square smiley face. And it said something along the lines of, I'm about to make you so happy, or something like that. And then I just issued a command that said, format B:/yes/ I think label : so happy, or something like that, right? I don't remember the exact title. But anyway, I do remember I'm about to make you so happy in the smiley face. And so it was hilarious. Oh, man. And I'm telling you, so the kids start going through the lesson plan. And, I'm like trying to, I know it's coming. Oh, and the first thing I did, of course, was when I got mine, was edit my own auto-exec bat to take that out of there, which may have been part of the reason I got caught later.
Right, might have something to do with it.
I'm not sure, but yeah, so like a third of the way.
For somebody super into programming and logic, there was a logic step there that was missed.
Yeah. So like 2/3 of the way through the class, you start hearing kids go, what, huh, what? And so basically what was happening, they would exit out, and it was formatting their work disk. So their entire work that they had done all semester was getting, and there's no backups of this stuff, right?
Right, nobody did backups.
Nobody did backups.
You couldn't afford extra disks.
So anyway, I wiped everybody's like disk. And like some of the kids, I guess, stopped, because they're like, other kids were way ahead or whatever. And the teacher was like, turn your computers off. She was like, telling everybody, turn your computers off. And so anyway, that happened, and I was trying so hard. I was like, don't laugh, don't smile, like gotta be calm here. I didn't do this. Be surprised.
Right.
So anyway, it was about. And by the way, that was just second period, and apparently she thought somebody did that during that class. Well, so third period, it happened again to all those kids. So anyway, like a couple hours later, I wound up in the principal's office, and I acted like I don't know what you're talking about.
Total denial. Just deny everything.
So
yeah.
I don't know. I didn't have
the first line of
this.
defense as a teenager.
Yeah, and so finally he starts threatening me and stuff, and he gets it out of me that I did indeed do this, and so he's like, okay, well here's what's going to happen. You and I are going to walk back down there to that class right now, and you're going to fix this. And what I didn't realize is the teacher had been trying for hours to fix it and didn't know how. And she
didn't know how to change the batch file, so it wouldn't keep formatting everybody's.
Exactly.
So really, they had to shut down that class for the whole day.
For the whole day,
minimum.
And all of those kids lost their work for the whole year because of me.
So did she just issue A's for everybody because their work was gone, or was it already recorded in a grade book? Back when grade books were a thing.
I assume that they got their grades for those already, because those were from weeks ago or whatever.
But I don't
really remember, but I do remember that I made an A in that class, and I guarantee you that teacher, when she wrote that A in there at the end of the year, she was like, that little shit,
Yeah.
giving him an A.
Did you get like detention or anything?
Oh yeah, I wound up with like 2 or 3 Saturday D holes in a row, and those were like 4 hours.
Oh, you got off light.
4 hours on a Saturday morning.
So I didn't realize that you were a monster.
I was a monster. Yeah, yeah. But that was an example of how I got myself in trouble.
I never did anything that extreme. So my friend Ash and I, you probably remember Ash.
I remember him well.
He
yeah.
was super computer literate, and I didn't know him until early high school, late middle school. But we had Mrs. Anderson. I guess I can say her name because nobody is going to know who that is. But she was our math teacher. And they decided that the math teachers were the ones who would know computers, right? Because math, computers, same thing. She started so I took this class. It was computer science, is what it was called in high school. And maybe it was the same thing that you ran into, because I remember having to take typing in my freshman or sophomore year of high school, which I'm actually thankful for because I can type fairly quickly now because of that class. So it served me for years, but maybe I had to take it in order to take the computer science. You could take business computing or whatever you took, something like that, or computer science, and that taught programming in Pascal. And I loved programming. Like, that was the part of computers I was most excited about. So anyway, she started the class saying, I don't know shit about, she didn't say that, but I don't know shit about computers. I know nothing. I'm a math teacher. I know math. They're making me teach this class. We'll just figure it out together. Which is really, to...
this is being honest.
Yeah, super honest, but we smelled fear in the waters, right? Like we're like going for blood, Ash and I, because we know all of this stuff. But I don't think we ever did anything quite that bad. But it was a similar sort of thing where we would finish our work immediately and then be bored. And boredom invents all kinds of nasty pranks. So we would open up the mice, because we were on Macintoshes by that time, and we'd open up the mice and throw the mice balls across the room and bounce them. I went to detention because of that. And then one time she left the class while we were doing our work, and we got all the printing paper and blocked off the door by taping it to the door. So the door opened from the outside. It would open towards her, and she would just see this wall of paper. Nothing near as high-tech as what you did. But we did make some primitive games in Pascal because we had nothing else to do. Like, that's...
it makes me think. I mean, I feel like, I don't know about you guys, but I feel like what they did to me in computer class, and again, I don't know how it's like today. I'm sure there's other classes that were like this at the time too, but I feel like they really did me a disservice, because rather than, they should have saw, hey, look, that kid can do that work in 5 minutes. Let's give him something else. Let's help him to foster. Let's foster that, right? Exactly. But instead, they didn't want to. They wanted nothing to do with that. Like, there's some kid over there that is somehow different, and he doesn't fit the mold. Just ignore him, And I just felt like that was a big time disservice to me.
Agreed.
Well, it was tough back then because nobody knew this stuff, so they didn't know whether it was really going to take off. They didn't know. I mean, one of the things, I'm sure, like you guys, you do a lot of tech support for your parents or your in-laws or uncles or whatever. And my mother-in-law is constantly saying, well, I'm dumb when it comes to the phone, the iPhone or my computer or whatever. And it's like, well, you're not a digital native. I forget where that term got. Somebody coined that term, a digital native. We are the first generation of digital natives where we got exposed to this stuff early on. Our kids are completely immersed as digital natives. So they're not afraid of any of it.
I think I've thought about this for years. I think that being exposed to that at an early age changed some pathways in my brain that make me perceive things differently than, say, my parents, who by the time computers came out, their brains simply were not able to adapt as readily.
Yeah, and I often wonder what's happening right now that's affecting me that way that I don't realize yet.
But so I want to tell you the story of how one of the very few times I got detention, and it was over a computer-related issue. Because I was generally a good student, and as far as like I didn't get into trouble, that kind of thing. But so we had this in that same writing lab I was telling you about earlier, where we went in there several times a year to write, redundantly write the stuff we'd already written on paper, which I thought was dumb. But anyway, so we went in there, and they had this rule at our school, and Craig, you'll probably both remember this because we all, by the way, for those listening, we all went to the same high school.
We probably should have started with that. Like, we all grew up in the same hometown, and that's how we knew each other.
So they had this rule that you had to buy a disc from the school store, a floppy disk, for you to use in class. And then they had, much like Mike said, there was a folder where they would keep your disc. You couldn't take it home with you or anything like that. Yeah. And the discs at the school store cost $5. So I remember on one of the very first days of computer lab, the teacher told us, that we had to go buy our disc, and I raised my hand and I asked a question. I says, "Well, look, I already have some discs at home. Can I just bring one?" And she's like, "No, we can't risk having discs from home. They might contain viruses." Now, being that these were Macintosh computers, we're past the 8-bit era, right? That was a valid concern, right? So I told her that I said, well. My computer, I think at the time I was still using I was using a Commodore Amiga at the time. So I told her, I says, "Oh, well, my discs at home are formatted for the Amiga, so there won't be any compatible code on there." And she's like, "Well, no, it doesn't matter. It needs to be a brand new disc." And I said, "Okay, well, can I just go up to Computer City?" They actually, at the time, it's kind of weird. Most people might not remember this, but the store we had called Computer City, they actually sold individual discs. You could buy a single floppy disk. It was like 69 cents or something like that. And actually, that's where the school got their stupid disc, because it had the Computer City logo on the discs packs that they were selling to people. So I said, "Well, look, I go to Computer City all the time. Can I just buy a brand new disc up there, bring it with the receipt, and show you it's brand new?" And she says, "No, I won't know for sure that's brand new." I said, "Okay, how about I buy a whole pack still in the shrink wrap, and I'll let you take one out, and then I'll use the rest at home because I need them all the time anyway. I just don't understand why I need to pay $5 for something."
You were an argumentative kid. Man,
you know,
you're just like, you should have been a lawyer. You missed your calling, man.
I was,
You're like pleading your case.
I was trying to find a way to what's the word I'm looking for? Satisfy
the requirements.
The requirements, but not pay $5, which is a ripoff, for a disc.
Totally.
And which would be more like 20 today, right?
Right.
Yeah, so, right. Inflation. That would
not
be
that we sound ridiculously old at this point in the conversation, but
yeah, like in today's money, that would be somebody saying you got to buy something for $20 when you can buy it down at the store for like $2 or something like that, or whatever. And so, anyway, I was trying to satisfy their needs, and she just wouldn't have it. Just like, nope, you got to buy it from the school store. And I asked her, like, well, why? If it's coming brand new in a pack, how could it possibly have a virus on it? And she says, well, they can come from the factory with viruses, which actually I think that did happen once or twice. It did happen. Was a really rare thing. So I've tried to make one last final plea. I said, okay, tell you what, I'll bring the disc, I'll give it to you. You can take it immediately over to your computer, put it there, and initialize it. That way it'll erase any data on that disk, including any viruses, and then give it back to me, and then I will use it that way. And she says, "Oh, well, that won't get rid of a virus." And I just couldn't help it at this point. I looked at the teacher. I said, "Ma'am, do you even know what a computer virus is?" And she got so angry when I said that. Of course, it was in front of the whole class.
Yeah. Right. I mean, you obviously insulted her.
But the reality is, she didn't know what a computer virus was. She really didn't.
It was a spooky, mysterious thing.
It was magic. It was some kind of magical thing. She had no comprehension of how it actually worked. And she got very angry at me for saying that. And she sent me to the principal's office, and I had to go to detention for it. And I eventually had to pay $5 for a stupid disc at the school store.
Oh, my gosh.
But I lost all respect for that woman that year, and I had to take that computer lab class several times. And
probably the right thing for her would be to go, look, like, all this computer stuff is new, like my teacher did. She's like, I'm a math teacher, I don't know this stuff. And we actually, practical jokes aside, like, looking back, it was kind of like, I kind of respect her for that, like, just the honesty. And your teacher just didn't want to be looked at as dumb. Well, and she's like, she could have just said, look, David, I appreciate that you know this stuff. You probably know it a lot better than me. But this is the rules that the school has provided. And I can't judge whether, the computer disk that you take from home will have a virus or not.
I've thought about that for years. She could have just said something like, I'm sorry, these are the rules that I'm required to follow. I have to cover my own,
Right.
ass. I guess she probably would have said that.
She probably didn't want to make exceptions for this student. That student,
right.
well, I'll format mine also. You know,
she could have just said, "Look, I don't. If I'm the one that's going to be held liable if this whole lab becomes infected because they were networked, by the way. So I would have probably had more respect for that answer than telling me lies or just." Lies probably isn't right. She literally just didn't know. She was making stuff up to try to cover her own authority.
But again, she was not a digital native, so she didn't have that in like her, the DNA of her background the way we did. We ate this stuff up from an early age, and a lot of people our age weren't digital natives.
Yeah. That whole digital native thing for me is kind of interesting too because I used to see this kind of stuff all the time, when I was a kid. But even today, I still see it. Like, I'll give you an example. One of my relatives told me the other day they got really mad. They said, "Oh, our Verizon FiOS, and they had symmetrical gigabit services. It was so terrible. It's the worst internet we've ever had, and we switched it out for Spectrum." Mm-hmm. And now they're at like, I don't know, 300 meg, down and 10 meg.
That's
up
what
or
I
something,
have.
right?
Yeah.
And it's like, and they think it's better. And the truth of the matter is, they had some problem with something else, their Wi-Fi router or whatever. They just blame their internet, right? Because they don't really know how it works underneath, much like your teacher didn't know how that disk works underneath. Do you guys feel like it's getting better? Like, do millennials and stuff know this stuff any better? I don't feel like they do.
I have to help Haley with, my daughter with stuff with her computer all the time when it's anything out of the ordinary. I will say, though, that one thing that's better, I can name a lot of things that are better. I'm sure a lot of people have seen it. I did this whole thing talking about my time working at AST, and a lot of those customers calling in had never used a computer before. They didn't even know how to type on them. They didn't even know the basic function of click on this, move. Well, some of them did, but a lot of them didn't. And I think that in that regard, like from a functionality of operating the overall operating system, I think way more people are knowledgeable about that. A lot more people know how to type. Because people are typing all the time, even if it's on their smartphone, it is a QWERTY interface, and they're typing on it all the time.
They kind of get where things are at.
To text message their friends. And the one thing that I have noticed is even though my daughter doesn't know a lot about computers, a big contrast between, say, her and my mom is that you can take Haley and put her in front of some website, like maybe you need to fill out some government form or something like that. She can just immediately say, "Oh, yeah, I need to put this here, click, 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 next." She's never seen that form before in her life, but she immediately figures out how to use it. Put that in front of my mom, and she's like, "I don't understand what to do here."
It's basic literacy.
That's
lacking.
And so I definitely see that people growing up now have a certain amount of literacy, and their brains are more able to understand user interfaces and stuff than I think
there's a term for that in user experience. I cannot remember what it's called, but it's where you basically understand the design language of it. Like you intuitively, a human, you've seen that design. It may not be the same colors, it may not be laid out the same, but you understand the design language behind it, right?
Right, so you know where to click where and what's going to happen next and how drop downs work.
I would also like to point out, though, that that's not a. I'm not trying to make fun of my mom. Because
no, it's a generational thing.
It is, and I'll give you an interesting example of how we grow up with knowledge that's just we make assumptions all the time just because we've grown up. So my daughter, of course, drives a Chevy Volt. For those who don't know, it's a car that runs on electric most of the time, but has a gasoline backup. Well, and before that, she had a pure electric car, and anyway, she had to go get gas for the first time on her own recently. And even though I had shown her like a year ago how to pump gas in a car, she actually didn't remember. And she had trouble figuring out how to operate the gas pump. And she had to have one of her friends, and this is the irony behind that, her friend that doesn't even have a driver's license and doesn't even have a car knew how to pump the gas and operate the machine and all that.
Funny.
Because they've seen their parents do it over and over again. Where Haley never sees us buy gas because we all have electric cars.
Well, David, this is obviously terrible parenting on your part. That you had these kids grow up with electric, cars that are, good for the environment and stuff. So.
But I'm just the point I'm making, of course, is that sometimes we have a lot of knowledge about things that we've just grown up with that seem natural to us, but might not seem natural to somebody else. Yeah. Just like I guarantee you, if you took me into a time machine and sent me back to like 1955 and told me to fill up my car with gas, I probably wouldn't have any idea how the pump works, because I've seen these in like
gravity fed and all that kind
like
of stuff.
they've got all these weird contraptions on them. Because there's one I saw recently at it wasn't a museum, but it was an old place where you eat, an old restaurant had one of those in there as like a museum piece display in there, and I was looking at that thing and I'm like, I don't know how this thing works. I honestly don't know. If you sent me back in time, if I would be able to fill up my car with gas without asking somebody, how does this stuff work on this pump?
Yeah, that's a really interesting take. Well, let's switch gears for a minute and kind of back up the time clock here just a minute and talk about what it was like to be a nerd or a geek in that time frame, not from a technology perspective so much, but from social perspective, how we were treated. And there were, like some kids that, they couldn't care, either way, whether you were a geek or not. I guess they really mostly called us nerds back then, right? But but there were some kids who, like, the second they found out that you liked computers or video games or any of that kind of stuff, they were immediately were the target for bullying and being picked on. Yeah. And I don't really know that I've ever wrapped my head around why that was the case, because it seems so bizarre thinking about it now. Like, I don't know. I just wonder thoughts on that.
Well, sorry.
I don't remember too many instances of being specifically ostracized for understanding or being into technology, but I had terrible social skills as a kid. So,
well, I think we probably all did.
Yeah, so maybe it was less what we were into, but the fact that I was shy, I was introverted, I took myself very seriously, I got offended easily. As a kid, my parents remember saying they would take me to Walmart and some kid would be there and they'd be like, "Hi, Craig." There'd be somebody I went to class with and I wouldn't answer. My mom's like, "Why don't you say hi to him?" I'm like, "They're not my friend." Like, I assumed everybody hated me.
Because I did some of the same stuff in my younger years, like pre-high school, like junior high or elementary school. I wouldn't talk to anybody that if I saw somebody from school outside of school, I would not talk to them. And I don't know why. Now later, in high school, I was not that way, and
but high school I started kind of blossoming a little bit more socially and things like that. But
I do think that there's probably a Venn diagram that you could draw of people who were into computers and people who had awkward social skills, and there's probably a big overlap, and that may be a lot of it. But I also think that, what are the things that are always glamorized from a social standpoint? It's always athleticism or being a really attractive girl. Things like that are the things that being good at sports and stuff like that. That's the things that always made you cool. Being able to program a computer was not considered cool, where being able to hit a home run on the baseball field would have been cool. So
I feel like Craig. So I think you're right. I think there's definitely an element to that, but I think also being a computer or video game person, again, nerd back then in that era was equivalent to being in the band or the chess club or like it was thought of that way, that's a band nerd, right? That's a computer nerd. It was just thought of the same way. You just weren't cool because you did that.
Yeah, you were associated with all that.
Well, and I see it today. We see it all the time. Intelligence is often when we look at the news, when we look at politics and whatnot. Oftentimes, intelligence is not a highly rated feature.
There was a certain political pundit that was referring to people as Poindexters or something like that, like a few years back, and I was just like, you're kind of insulting them because they're too book smart. You don't like that they're book smart, and you're just a loud, political commentary person.
That's an interesting point, because I do feel like throughout the history of mankind, there has been a certain segment of the population that has shunned intelligence.
Yeah, exactly.
For whatever reason. And maybe that's just a piece of that was, coming out.
Well, that's exactly what I'm saying. I'm going to throw a number out there. I think it's about maybe 40 or 50% of the population is, I think that they're...
Tread carefully, David.
Yeah, tread carefully.
And that was the end of the podcast.
Yes, because see you guys in the next episode.
I think that some people are intimidated by intelligence, because they can maybe see, hey, this other person's smarter than me, and that makes me feel bad. So I'm just going to make fun of that person for being smart and pretend that that's something that I don't like, even though secretly they really wish they were more intelligent.
You know, I don't know, and this is going way off of our topic, but it is really interesting because, but I feel like, I think some people that are on that scale, they don't recognize intelligence, right? You know, you and I both know some people that are unintelligent that believe they're the smartest people on the planet, right? As
Dunning-Kruger, absolutely.
Yes. And so I'm not sure that they even recognize it sometimes.
Well, I think some of them do, some of them don't. And
or maybe even be kind of subconscious. You know, they know something's different about you, and they don't like it. So.
Yeah, could be. Well, so David, I know you were probably picked on a lot more than I was for whatever reason. I don't know.
Because I was the shortest kid in school.
Probably. But
and that's not an exaggeration. I was the shortest boy in school until I think my sophomore year of high school.
Okay. Well, so that sort of answers the question I was going to ask. But I was going to ask you, do you feel like that it was because you were a nerd that you were picked on, or was it other things? And now you're saying maybe it's...
It was a combination of things. It was a combination of me being an easy target. It was a combination of me being a nerd, so they had something to make fun of me of. It was a common, there's a lot of things. I mean, that we could go into a whole podcast about the psychology of being bullied and whatnot that I've learned over the years. But yeah, there was a combination of things, and being a computer nerd certainly didn't help my case any from a social standpoint, which I was totally baffled by at the time because I couldn't understand, like, why don't other people find this interesting?
Yeah.
Why doesn't everybody have a Commodore at home? Why doesn't everybody have?
You had a neighbor that picked on you a lot. Did it have anything to do with being a nerd, or was there something else there?
I had a number of bullies. I don't know. I think some of it was social skill. Some of it was they were athletic and I wasn't. Some of it they were just more aggressive. They were just aggressive kids. And if I had pushed back a lot more, I mean, the one time I really fought back against a bully, he was picking on my brother. And it was like, no, the line is drawn here. This far, no farther.
Only I may pick on this one.
And, so I went to his house and I hit him in the face in his front yard. And that was, I think he tried to bully me a couple more times, but that was pretty much it. Like, he left me alone for a long time after that. But the other thing I was thinking of this is like, so I had this poor combination, similar to you, David. Like, I was tall and skinny, I had acne, and I was into computers, but I was also into fantasy and science fiction
Dungeons and
Dragons.
Stuff.
And a lot of that was considered, in our small town, that was considered satanic.
Yes.
There was the big 1980s scare about Dungeons and Dragons, and Richard Garriott of the Ultima series wrote a lot about that. That's kind of why he did Ultima 4, was to kind of make it nice and add this concept of virtues and stuff. But the previous Ultima game had like a demon on it, so there was a lot of that as well. I think just the stink, I guess, of fantasy and sci-fi.
Yeah, and we did have a couple of kids in our town. I can't remember their names, but they were actually in Mansfield that murdered one of their friends or something, and claimed that they were playing Dungeons and Dragons is why they did it.
Right.
And I think that's where the big scare in our little podunk town, came from.
But of course, I don't believe that for a
No,
moment.
and it actually came out years later that it had nothing to do with it whatsoever. But that was the excuse that the parents needed something to blame it on,
right?
Because they couldn't blame it on their kids.
It was so laughingly ridiculous, because it's a bunch of beta males, back then at least, that were playing Dungeons and Dragons, a bunch of nerdy little guys that didn't have any violent impulse in their psychology at all. Like, they just wouldn't hurt a fly. A lot of us were very timid, shy kind of kids. So, but yeah, it's put all that together, and it's hard to say, like, well, did I gravitate towards these non-athletic, kind of socially ostracized hobbies like comic books and D&D and computers because I was already socially awkward, or was it because I was a little smarter, and that's where the other socially awkward kids, or did that make me socially awkward?
You totally beat me there, because that's what I was just about to ask. I wanted to know were you a nerd because of computers, or did computers make you a nerd? Like, which way did it go?
I was exposed to them so young. I'm not sure I could even answer that question, because I don't know how I would have turned out for sure without exposure to computers. I would have been exposed to them eventually at some point. I would like to circle back, though, to one thing. All of us, I believe, were into, modems and calling BBSs and things like that. And there was like this whole other world that we experienced when we got home.
For sure.
And the closest analogy I could use today is imagine that there's a group of people that like going to school with you, for example, that does not know that there's this thing, or maybe they've heard there's this thing called the internet, but they've never actually used it. And right, and so that's kind of how we were. Only we were in the minority. We had this network of other people we were talking to all the time.
We had the same interest.
Yeah,
and we were just like us.
And we were playing little games online. We were
leaving messages
games,
for each other.
We would even download files like the teaching you how to do various hacking and and things like that. I remember
Absolutely.
There was that. What was that thing you called something guide? Anarchist guide, anarchist cookbook, things like that you could download from EBSs that tell you how all the phone systems and all these kinds of things worked. The other kids at school were totally oblivious to this. They were, and they could simply not see, and you couldn't even explain to them. I mean, you'd have to sit them down for hours to explain to them this whole other universe that you were part of.
Yeah, those poor saps were running around driving cars with girls and stuff like that.
Yeah, getting dates.
Yeah. But
David, that is fantastic. It's almost like more like the comparison to the Matrix, right? Like you went home every night and got on the Matrix, and had this whole different life, and it's true because in fact, there were many times where I would stay up till 2, 3, 4 in the morning sometimes, barely could get out of bed the next day to go to school because I had been up all night long on BBSs, chatting with other people or downloading files or reading things like the Anarchist Cookbook and things like that, which, it was like I had two lives for many of those years.
It's occurred to me that, we mentioned like fantasy books and staying up on BBSs. Maybe we were just too sleep deprived to socially interact with other people because we were up till 3 in the morning all the time. And I did it many times. Like every game and stuff was like, it was an addiction.
I have to tell you again, Mom, I'm sorry for listening to this. I was not a terrible kid, I promise. But I mean, there were many times where I stayed up as late as I couldn't keep my eye open any longer and would finally go to sleep. Sometimes laying at my computer, sometimes in bed, it just depends. But then what I would wind up doing is sleeping in class the next day at school because I was trying to catch up on sleep.
Yeah, many times. How can I with this day?
I think we probably wrap this up.
So I was just about to say
we went a full hour.
We went a full hour and our target was 40 minutes, but that's okay. That was an interesting conversation. And so this is all unscripted, so we'll just see where it goes in the future. But think that will wrap it up for this episode. We have many more coming on a whole bunch of topics we've already got planned out. I'm not sure what the cadence will actually be, but we will see you guys in the next podcast.